Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I am on the PTR for New World and I want to go over the Void Gauntlet, go over all of its abilities and all of its different talent choices. Now to make this a little bit more easily, I'm just going to go over all of the weapon mastery talents, all of its abilities, go over what they do, and then at the end I'm just going to have footage at the end showing off a bunch of the abilities in combat so it's a bit more easy to follow. So if you just want to see a bunch of the abilities, the animations, that will be later on in the video and I'll have timestamps so you can go and find that much more easily. So just to start off, I think this is easily the most unique weapon in the game and has some of the coolest features and effects. And if you don't know, the Void Gauntlet is essentially a hybrid between dealing damage and healing. And you have more than just self-healing, you also have a lot of healing that can work for your groups, and it scales off focus and intelligence, and we're not sure which one is its main scaling attribute yet because that's not added into the game yet. It doesn't say like all the other weapons, say if it's a primary or secondary scaling stat. But even just off the attacks and blocking, this weapon is very unique. So the light attacks deal 100% void damage, heavy attacks deal 125% void damage, and heal you for 20% of the damage dealt. So just dealing a heavy attack will self-heal depending on how much damage it's dealing. And then instead of a normal block, you have Harvest Essence. So when you hold block, it converts your health into mana over time. The rate scales with your weapon damage. So essentially you have a bunch of self-healing, and then you can also convert your health into mana to quickly gain back all of your mana. So really skilled players with this weapon will be able to have a ridiculous amount of self-sustain in terms of mana and health. So next up for the abilities. So on the right side for the Annihilation tree, we have Void Blade with a 25-second cooldown, Summon a Blade of Void Energy that converts your basic attacks to melee, tap basic attack to perform a quick slash that deals 100% weapon damage, or hold to perform a thrust attack that deals 150% weapon damage. Both attacks inflict Disintegrate on successful hits, dealing 5% weapon damage per second and reducing damage absorption by 5% for 8 seconds. Stacks up 3 times, 15-second duration. So this turns your basic attack, which is normally ranged like the other ranged weapons, into a melee attack that changes the damage scaling a little bit and then adds a damage over time and a debuff to the targets to make them take more damage. So very good. And something to note with the Void Blade is that blocking with it currently doesn't do the harvest where you convert health into mana. It's currently just a block. Not sure if that's going to stay like that or if it's supposed to be like that, but just doesn't say on the tooltip. Next, we have Oblivion, 20-second cooldown, summons a circular rift of void energy or feat that deals 30% weapon damage per second to enemies and grants Empower to self and friendlies, increasing damage by 20%, 5-meter radius, 6-second duration. So this is incredibly strong for group content, and you are going to want one of these anytime you're in a group, because just this ability can give you and all your allies a 20% damage buff for 6 seconds on a 20-second cooldown, which is a pretty good uptime even without any other cooldown reductions. And then the final ability, we have Petrifying Scream, 15-second cooldown, unleash a void-infused scream, dealing 100% weapon damage, staggering and inflicting root to enemies 5 meters in front of you, disables enemy movement for 2 seconds. So essentially this deals your basic attack damage, but also staggers and roots enemies. So rooting is essentially a soft CC. They can't move after they hit with the root. And if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the only roots in the game. I don't know if there's specifically any other roots. And adding roots is a really good alternative to hard CC, especially in a game with this free of movement. So you're able to root a target, lock them down. It doesn't fully stun them, so it's not just adding more stuns, but allows you to catch them, but they still have a chance to fight back because they're not stunned. Then on the Decay side, we have Orb of Decay, 15-second cooldown, fire an unblockable orb that passes through enemies, dealing 100% weapon damage and inflicts Disintegrate, dealing 5% weapon damage per second and reducing damage absorption by 5% for 8 seconds, stacks up 3 times. At max range, it transforms into a healing orb and returns healing friendlies for 20% weapon damage per second for 5 seconds. Healing scales exclusively with focus. So essentially what this does, you shoot out an orb that does damage all the way out to its max range. It also inflicts Disintegrate, which we've went over, and then it turns into a healing orb and comes back to the position it was cast from, and any allies that are hit by the healing portion of the orb will get healed for 20% of your weapon damage damage per second for 5 seconds. A similar thing to Moira if you've ever played Overwatch, just kind of both orbs in one. And this can be really strong for AoE damage and for AoE group healing. Next up, we have Essence Rupture. Fires a projectile that inflicts Essence Rupture for 10 seconds, healing anyone that hits a target for 20% of the damage done. Does not apply to damage over time. So essentially, this is a debuff which will then cause everybody that just hits the target to be healed for 20% of the damage they are dealing. Now, I think this has the possibility of being one of the strongest heals in the game, especially for PvE and especially for fighting bosses, because you can just apply this on a target and most characters should be able to keep themselves alive for that 10 seconds, because 20% of your damage dealt is pretty massive healing, especially if they're just a pure damage build. Then we have Baleful Tether. Fire projectile that tethers you to an enemy, weakening it and empowering you by 4% per second, 20% maximum. The tether ends if the target moves beyond 15 meters, 10-second duration. So essentially, you tether yourself to somebody. If they stay within range, it keeps stacking up the tether and it reduces the amount of damage they deal and increases the amount of damage you deal 4% per second with a 20% maximum. So this is very good for going against single bosses and very good for going against, say, 1v1 PvP fights. So next we're going to go through all of the other passive talents, then I'll go over the upgrades for all the abilities. So first we have Forsaken Pact, 10% damage while below 50% mana. So that can be really strong because besides your block that converts your health into mana, you don't have a lot of mana regenerating things in this build, or at least as much as some of the other weapons, so you can more easily control getting this buff. Then we have 10% crit chance while above 50% health, incredibly strong, especially with a weapon that's built around keeping you at high health and healing you. 10% crit chance is massive. 10% cooldown reduction on all abilities on critical hit. This is again massive, especially mixed with the other passive we just went over. 10% crit chance while all abilities are on cooldown. Again, massive and synergizes with both of these other talents we already went over. Gain Empower while casting abilities within 5 meters of an enemy. Increases damage by 10% for 5 seconds, stacks up 3 times. And this is really strong as well. So if you're playing more of a melee build, which this side is kind of focused on, you're just going to be stacking up a damage increasing buff for 5 seconds, which is pretty long. And this is going to allow you to get a massive amount of bursts after using your abilities. So you could run in, use all 3 abilities. So then you're stacked up 30% damage, which is pretty massive. Then we have Harvest Essence. Health drain is reduced by 50% while below 25% mana. So that is our block that converts health into mana. So if you're really low mana, it reduces how much health it's taking, but keeps the mana the same. Then we have on critical hit, gain health equal to 15% of the damage done. So synergizes with all of our other critical passives we just went over. Then 5% cooldown reduction on all abilities when successfully hitting enemies afflicted by 3 or more debuff stack, can be from different debuffs. So essentially, if a target has a bunch of debuffs on them, you'll get more cooldown reduction when hitting them with abilities. Then the ultimate for the side, which is probably the strongest part of this weapon, a Void Caller. On successful ability hit, gain a stack of Void Essence. At 6 stacks, consume all stacks and gain a 3-meter aura that heals self and friendlies for 30% weapon damage and deals 30% weapon damage per second to enemies within. Healing scales exclusively with focus, 5% duration, 20-second cooldown. When you're hitting targets, you are getting these stacks that go up to 6 stacks. When it hits 6 stacks, it creates an AoE on you that deals damage and heals you and allies in this radius. It's incredibly strong for AoE healing and AoE damage, and it's not that long of a cooldown, and it also works off basic attacks off Void Blade because it's an ability. I'm not 100% if it works just off basic attacks or not. Now for the ability upgrades for Void Blade, gain Fortify on start, increasing damage absorption by 20% for 5 seconds. So when you cast Void Blade, you have 20% damage reduction for 5 seconds, 10% critical damage on Void Blade attacks, so just 10% increased crit damage. Successful thrust attacks heal for 5% weapon damage per disintegrate stack on the target, scales with focus. If you thrust attack something, you'll heal for 5% of that with every disintegrate stack. Disintegrate can stack up to 3 times. Then for Petrifying Scream upgrades, root duration increased by 1 second on targets below 50% health, so it's up to 3 seconds if they're below 50, and then gain Fortify for each enemy hit, increasing damage absorption by 10% for 10 seconds per hit, stacks up to 3 times. So a massive damage reduction if you're hitting a lot of targets with this ability. Then for the Oblivion upgrades, your attacks inflict weaken to targets inside the radius, reducing their damage by 5% for 5 seconds per hit, stacks up 3 times. So it just reduces the damage of enemies if you're hitting them when they're in Oblivion. Then plus 15% stamina per second for self and friendlies while inside the radius. So you or any of your teammates standing in your Oblivion gain pretty ridiculous stamina regen while they're in it. Then for the passive on the decay side, plus 10% damage on successful range heavy attacks against targets more than 8 meters away. So farther away targets, you deal more heavy damage too. Mana costs are reduced by 25% while above 50% mana. So this will probably be passive you might want with any build you're running because that's just a massive mana cost reduction. Cooldowns are reduced by 10% per second while performing Harvest Essence. So this is pretty crazy as well because you can reduce your cooldowns massively just by converting your health into mana. So there might even be a build that goes into no mana regen or no mana increasing talents or effects. So you can just get your cooldowns back much quicker by converting your health into mana. Then plus 5% mana per successful range light attack against targets afflicted by your Void Gauntlet debuffs. So any debuffs you put on a target, then light attack, you'll gain 5% mana back. Then healing from range heavy attack is increased by 30% if the target is below 50% health. So this will make you heal for 50% of the damage dealt from your heavy attacks if the target's below 50%. Then successful range heavy attacks increase the duration of non-crowd control debuffs you have applied by 10%. So any debuffs that aren't a CC will get increased when you heavy attack the target. Then dodging with full mana heals you for 80% weapon damage, scales exclusively with focus 20-second cooldown. Essentially every 20 seconds, if your mana is full, you can dodge and get a pretty big heal. And then for the ultimate, gain a stack of Void Essence per successful ability hit. At 4 or more stacks, your next successful range heavy attack will instantly reset all Void Gauntlet cooldowns and remove all stacks. 15-second cooldown. If you play the class at a high level, you will be able to pretty often reset all of your ability cooldowns. Pretty much everything in this weapon seems really strong, to be honest. Then for our ability upgrades for Orb of Decay, we gain 5% mana per enemy hit by the orb. The orb slows enemies afflicted by any debuff, reducing their movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds. So if you already have a debuff on a target, it will then slow them by 30%. Then press the ability input again to detonate the orb with a 4-meter explosive radius. Depending on the orb's phase, the explosion will either damage enemies for 100% weapon damage and apply a stack of Disintegrate, or heal friendlies for 70% weapon damage and healing scales off focus. You can press the ability again to blow up the orb, dealing damage if it's the damage phase of the orb, or healing allies if it's the healing phase of the orb. Then for Baleful Tether, successful hits against a tethered target reduce other Void Gauntlet cooldowns by 5%. So this doesn't affect the cooldown of the tether, but all other abilities. That can be pretty ridiculous as well. 100% mana regen while the tether is active, so massive mana regen while you have your tether on. Then regain 80% weapon damage as health if the tethered target dies, scales with focus. So if you kill a tethered target, you then gain a massive heal as well, and this will make the tether one of the best soloing abilities in the game pretty easily because you can just constantly tether new targets and keep yourself high health and never have to slow down killing enemies. Then for Essence Rupture, players additionally receive 15 stamina when hitting the afflicted target, pretty massive. Friendlies within 4 meters of the afflicted target are healed for 80% of your weapon damage when Essence Rupture ends, scales with focus. So essentially, when your Essence Rupture ends on the target, if there are any allies in the area, it heals them for a pretty big heal. So that is everything about the new Void Gauntlet weapon. Like I said, easily the most unique weapon in the game. As you'll see after I'm done talking, some of the coolest animations in the game. It's seeming like this may get nerfed because a lot of these abilities or passives seem pretty strong. And I think if they don't nerf some of this stuff, this will most likely be too meta of a weapon. But it seems like a very, very fun weapon to use. And for the footage, I'm just going to put all of my points into one side of the tree. So we'll do some footage with all annihilation abilities, then we'll do some footage with all DK abilities. So it's pretty much all I want to go over with the new Void Gauntlet weapon. So subscribe if you want to see more New World or other MMO videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about this new weapon, and thanks for watching.